Hi, I'm Matthew. I'm a product manager on the Azure Functions team.
I'm Fabio. I'm with the Azure Functions engineering team.
And today we're going to be talking about functions, how to use all the best things in .NET and make sure you're writing the best serverless applications you can.
That's right.
So we're going to assume some knowledge of functions, but we're going to make sure everybody gets caught up here right now. So when we're talking about Azure Functions, we're talking about a set of events that exist within your system. That could be an HTTP request coming in, a timer firing, messages in a queue, images getting uploaded to a blob store, things like that. And then we want to write a piece of code that is going to react to that event. That's the main idea. So we're going to then bundle that up, put it into Azure, where we're not going to have any infrastructure to manage. We're not going to have to deal with scale, and we're only going to pay for what we're using. The idea here is that as events come in, and we'll scale you out automatically to meet whatever load that is. And then, the only amount of, only when your code is running are you actually being charged for it. So it's a really nice model. And at the end of the day, it allows you to focus on just writing that code and doing what makes the most sense for your application. Give us a piece of code, tell us what events cause it to run.
Right. And with that basic context in mind, and for those of you who are familiar with functions, I want to transition into the main focus of our presentation today, which is talking a little bit about the .NET isolated, the .NET experience, and what we have been working on for the past year. So if we switch back to the slides, we'll be able to see a little bit of the work that has been happening over the past 6 months to a year now. So even for folks who may be familiar with isolated, you may have used that in the past with .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET 7, and a lot has changed since then. A lot has been introduced in the past, just as short as just a few months ago. Yeah. Deeper integration with ASP.NET, but significant enhancements of the binding model, a lot of performance optimizations. We have a list of items here. I'm not going to go through every single one of those. There's been a lot of work done here. But I would urge you to go to the link that we're sharing here. Even if you're familiar with the isolated model, if you have functions running with the isolated model, check out what we've been working on and what we have recently announced. A lot of that came in conjunction with the .NET 8 support announcement. So there have been a lot of improvements that you may want to take advantage of.
Yeah, it's quite different. And in fact, it's maybe worth even showing kind of what Isolated has gone through and sort of why we did it and what kind of things have changed. Yeah. So, going way back, before we had the Isolated worker model, we had the in-process model. And some of the features that you were just talking about, you'll see they were in the in-process model from the get-go or came along the way. But then starting in .NET 5, that's when we introduced the isolated model because turns out there were some issues with the in-process model, and we got great feedback from the community that kind of pointed to some things that needed to change, namely making sure that you had full control over everything that's loaded, all the dependencies that are brought in, how main gets constructed, set up, how things just even work with the .NET ecosystem, making sure that you're doing standard things for DI, making sure that basically all of your expectations from being a .NET developer translated well into being a functions developer as well.
Right. Alignment and consistency with the rest of the .NET ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that you could just bring those .NET skills onto functions and leverage them.
Right. But as you can see, there was a bit of a schism of features that came from that. So over time, we've sort of worked on that. With .NET 6, that was the first time that we were able to do an update to the isolated model in terms of okay, day zero support, we've got it ready to go on GA day. And then, some additional extensibility, things like that. So kind of one of the advantages with isolated is that it really is just a TFM change that, in order to get yourself to the new version. And so being able to just have that simplicity was something that was pretty big for that release.
So again, consistent with the rest of the .NET experiences, with the migration, the upgrade scenario, the upgrade experience there is very simple.
Exactly. And then in the timeline going into .NET 7 and all the way up to here to .NET 8, that's when we're able to go back and really bring in all those things. So now the isolated worker model has all the capabilities that we'd expect with functions, but critically, it offers a lot of control and, again, allows you to bring a lot more of your existing .NET knowledge to bear.
And with that, we arrive at the .NET support that was announced yesterday, right? So it is supported day 0. It's now available in every single one of our managed SKUs. This also provides a very simple upgrade experience, the upgrade experience you were describing earlier. In most cases, that becomes a simple target framework change to your project, validation, redeployment, and you have your application running. So hopefully a very seamless experience that is, again, consistent with what you would expect from a regular .NET application.
Yeah. And so I think now at this point, let's just dive in and show it.
That's right. Yeah, let's switch to the demos. We're focusing on isolated. We talked a little bit about the new features that we've been working on. Right. So I want to highlight some of that. But I want to highlight a slightly different aspect. We'll talk a little bit about the experience, the developer experience that those new features enable. But I also want to show some of the performance enhancements that came with some of those features. Yeah. So let's take a look here at a simple function that implements a very common pattern that we see customers bringing to functions frequently. Just the ability for you to download the payload that is coming from blob storage in this case. Right. But as a very simple example that shows how, as a result of an HTTP request, so we're using the HTTP trigger, and I have the trigger defined here. I'm going to use an input that is coming from blob storage and use that payload as my response. So I want to provide that back to the client. Pretty simple code, pretty straightforward. The key thing that I want to focus on is we're going to run this today, and I want to look at the performance. So we're going to contrast what we had before. So this is before all of the enhancements. Right. Let's go ahead and run this. And it's a very simple way to measure the performance impact here, but we're just going to look at the diagnostic tools EVS. Just straightforward, nothing fancy. We're just going to look at some of those details. We see here where we started, what we have as the application memory utilization right now. And I'm going to download this file. This file is about 250 megs in size. So we see here that 212 megs in size. If we switch back to the application, we see here that during the course of the download, we did trigger garbage collection a few times. Yeah. We see here the memory spiked, and we used up to close to a gig of memory with that one simple function. Yeah. So a lot of data copying between some of the binding operations and what was taking place here. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the function after migrating, after adopting some of the newer capabilities and some of the newer features that we've exposed. Yeah, please. I love it already. The key thing is that will jump at you, particularly if you are a .NET developer coming from an ASP.NET background, is the fact that I'm using ASP.NET abstractions here. So I'm using HTTP request, I'm using by action result. So code that already feels a lot more familiar to me. This also applies to customers coming from older .NET models in functions. So very consistent migration experience if I'm coming from some of those models onto the isolated model. I haven't changed my blob input, so that looks identical, but I do get some of the performance benefits that we discussed at the beginning. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to set my project as the startup. Good call. And let's run this version with the latest and greatest dependencies, with the latest model being applied here. Okay, so we're debugging this. We have VS running in the background with diagnostics running. We're downloading the same exact payload, same size, but what we see here is that memory utilization is significantly better. We are making a lot more efficient use of the fact that we have access to the underlying HTTP stream. We have much more efficient communication with the underlying services with the autoproc model. So you see here that we're very efficiently transmitting that data that is coming from blob storage and passing that as my HTTP response to the client. And the memory utilization is significantly different between the two.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a combination of just the newer dependencies that are doing things more efficiently on their own, but then also some of the changes to the code there that you made in terms of how you're writing that response back through the HTTP request object, right?
Yeah. Again, this is measuring private bytes, but it gives you a good sense of the memory impact. The model for the worker itself remains the same, right? So if you used isolated before, you're familiar with the fact that you own the entry point of the application. You manage your dependencies. You are, again, using a very common set of APIs that is consistent with the rest of .NET applications, using the dependency injection and builder patterns here to essentially build up your application and bring the dependencies you want to use.
Right, yeah, that configure services is going to be familiar to folks all over, right?
That's right.
So, yeah, I mean, it really is very akin to console app or whatever else that you might be doing, building out a host.
And that's the goal, is to provide a very similar experience to that.
Right.
Okay, so with that in mind and seeing the perf impact, let's switch back to the slides and take a closer look at the developer experience and how some of that work has enhanced that experience.
Right, yeah, because we originally started talking there about, hey, that blob was just the same code, really, but you were just getting the efficiencies out of the newest versions.
Right. I was consuming a stream. I didn't change that. I didn't touch that piece of code. I got the performance benefits, but the development experience remained the same.
Right. So in contrast, we also have the ability to change that development experience a little bit, particularly bringing in types from the Azure SDK. So in this case, I'm also actually pulling in data from a stream, but then I'm using a blob container client to write a transformed version of that file back out. And so I'm creating files. That's why I want a container client here. But you can also bind to blob clients and things like that. For any of the Azure SDK types connected with our various extensions. This is really nice because you can't necessarily express everything that you would want to in just, the data model of the payload that you're sending back, controlling that stream processing, some of the lifecycle things, like in this case, creating, if not exists, those kinds of things. So
that binding, those binding enhancements, they're giving us the performance enhancements that we were looking at, but we've been able to layer on top of that and create that rich experience that customers are used to with the rich set of types provided by the underlying SDKs.
Yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with the Azure SDKs, if you're doing things with these different services already, it's going to be pretty nice in terms of just translating all those things over. And if you're not using the Azure SDKs, they're really good and make a lot of things in Azure way simpler. Really nice technology. Now that said, we don't always want to be using client objects. That's helpful when I want to get that level of control. But in some cases, it is better to just deal with certain data models. So we'll get into a different example here. But just as a setup, you showed that configure services. We're doing some dependency injection. It's the same on the other end too, right? We're just doing some constructor-based injection to get a logger or an HTTP client. That's actually really important to note as well. If you're dealing with high-scale applications and we're going to be having, lots of requests coming through and high concurrency, you don't want to be doing things like new HTTP client all over the place. So it's a pattern that, we see all over the place in terms of, DI throughout the .NET ecosystem. You want to make sure that you're bringing all those same things over, any custom services, of course, as well. So then when we're consuming those from a given function, in this case, what we have here is a service bus trigger. So we're getting a message and it's coming in as the service bus received message. So that's a data model from the Azure SDK for .NET. And then what we're doing is we're taking that HTTP client, we're sending a request, and then we'd like to think that all of our HTTP requests are going to go through smoothly. It's not always the case. Sometimes things come back and say too many requests, and you need to be able to handle that. So one of the things that's really nice about Service Bus in particular is the notion of control over the message processing pipeline, like the overall lifecycle of those messages. And so in this case, we're actually able to defer that message. There are other settlement actions like completion, abandon, there's a bunch of different ones that you can do. But in this case, because I'm assuming something's gone wrong with my downstream service, maybe I'll try again later. We'll defer it for now.
So it gives you the ability to easily leverage the existing set of APIs provided by the SDK and some of the experiences that you would expect to deal with transient faults, right?
Right. So, you're fully in control, and it provides all the kind of capabilities that you'd expect when working with that service.
Cool. So we kind of jumped a little bit from perf to experience, but
it all comes back to perf, right?
Yeah, we wanted to touch on perf a little more, particularly on guidance that will help with cold start perf. I think that's one thing that is always in mind when we're working with serverless workloads. Right. So we do have a lot of guidance on how to get the best performance when running with .NET Isolated, when running Autoproc with .NET. As you could see here, just referencing the latest versions of the packages will already bring a lot of benefits.
It's a huge difference.
Yes. So the sample, the demo that we walked through, most of the impact that we were seeing was just because of the fact that we were moving from some of the previous packages to the latest packages that use a lot of the new capabilities that have been introduced at the platform layer. Right. So first recommendation, make sure you're running on latest and greatest. All the latest packages. Use framework references. This is particularly important for ASP.NET. Right. If you're using the ASP.NET integration, the package will actually bring that automatically for you. So that makes life easy. But using framework references will reduce the payload size, which it is something that has an impact on cold start. Adopting the latest features. So the first bullet here is about actually bringing in the latest packages, right? So referencing the latest code, the latest packages, so that you're bringing those capabilities in, but actually making the code changes. You can take that step by step, where you get the first benefit of upgrading your packages. Then you leverage things like the ASP.NET Core integration, which will give you deep integration into ASP.NET and give you the ability to work with the HTTP request stream. Be a lot more efficient about how you're handling those types of workloads. Same thing for the enhanced bindings, where you have access to SDK types that give you the ability to very efficiently work with those services. Configure your function to use 64-bit. This is a configuration that is applied at the function app level. By default, we actually changed our default. So by default, your application will be created to use 64-bit. This may be counterintuitive in some scenarios, but there are some significant platform improvements here and platform functionality that will improve cold start time for applications running 64-bit. So we strongly recommend that whenever possible. Deploy using ready to run. Ready to run is a .NET feature. It helps project a lot of the methods that would otherwise be JITed at startup time.
Right.
So that is also one of our recommendations. We don't expect it to remember all of these. So we do have a page here. There is a link that will take you to documentation that will provide all of those recommendations and really go a little more in depth into why you want to do that and the details and how to actually enable all of those capabilities.
Yeah.
And we also wanted to make sure that we've been saying that throughout the session, but all of the general .NET practices, the general recommendations for .NET applications, they would apply here as well. So if there is something you're doing for your ASP.NET site, for your ASP.NET services, apply by all means, apply the same recommendations to functions. It's just another type of .NET app. So the same recommendations would apply here as well.
Yeah, of course, test those out before running forward with them.
As in any scenario, validate, make sure those recommendations make sense for your workload and make sense in the context of functions, or how functions are running. But in general, if there is something that you're doing in .NET today, it would apply to your functions workloads.
Right. And I think maybe the one caveat there is, certainly I would say that now .NET 8 would be the best recommendation. If you're watching this live, though, there's some optimization that still happens in the platform after release. So we're still going through that. So it's not quite at the peak that it's going to be quite yet. So it just might be noticeable if you're comparing it with some of the other versions.
It's a good call out.
But only point in time. But then when you are ready to actually migrate, boy, this has just gotten so much better over time. The .NET Upgrade Assistant is really good for just taking any .NET workload forward to new versions, but for functions in particular, it also adds the ability to take in-process model applications over to the isolated worker model. And then if you're using an older version of the runtime at all, it'll get you to latest as well. So super helpful. It's not going to cover everything. Like there might still be some code changes, but it takes away a lot of the boilerplate. So if you have older versions of SDKs that you're using, you're just going to have to go through and adjust those a bit.
Yeah, this does all of the job of making sure that you're bringing, like converting from the previous models, all of the little property changes, project level changes, API name changes that might exist between, particularly in proc and out of proc. This will handle a lot of that for you. And I use this if I'm migrating my own apps because it leaves me in a position where I can put on my developer hat and say, okay, what's broken now at compilation time and go fix a lot of that. As opposed to working with all of the boilerplate and all of the project level changes that I have to
Once you've done the adjustment like once, you really don't want to go through and adjust like every single binding attribute or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But it does make it really easy. It gives you that nice diff view if you're using source control as well. So you're able to kind of see all the things that I take great satisfaction in seeing all the things I didn't have to do.
And a lot of this work here came directly from customer feedback, right? Yeah. A lot of the pain points during the migration. We're trying to make migration as easy as possible. Migration from older versions, make sure that the folks have the ability to work with the latest set of bits that are available. And these helps. We are continuously improving these. So a new release will be coming out soon with additional support that actually leverages a lot of the capabilities that we've been able to talk about today. So.
Yeah, so that'll get
strongly recommend this.
It'll get you to the latest and greatest for sure.
We also wanted to talk about the fact that Azure Functions in general, all of the components, the host, but today we're talking about the worker. It is an open source project. All of the work the team does is done in the open. All of our development is done in the open. The issue triage, communication with customers and amongst ourselves is done through issues on GitHub. And also want to take this opportunity to express gratitude for all the contributions that we're seeing from external community members. We wouldn't be here without those contributions. Everything that we've been able to talk about today was shaped by either direct feedback, just talking about the features on some of those issues with folks, or direct code contributions that came in form of PRs against the workers. So if you want to engage, by all means, please come to the repo. That's the right place to learn about how the code works, but also make sure that you provide feedback and you have access to previews, and you engage with the rest of the team as well.
Yeah, I mean, that truly everything that we discussed today really was touched by the community at some point. And it's been really rewarding just to I don't know, see the excitement about the isolated model as it really has come together with all of these great features and plenty more to come as well.
Yep.
So I guess that brings us to the end then.
That's right.
Again, I think we just want to say thanks to the community and thanks for watching. I guess we'll now see if we have any questions.
Yeah, thank you.